Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. We'll discuss today on the idea of the Indian pedophile ring. What exactly is the Indian pedophile ring? What it stands for? What its core functionality is? And what is the main purpose behind this ring? Because we have heard this idea, reoccurring idea again and again, the Indian pedophile ring operating in the Western countries, the Indian pedophile ring, and it just keeps on coming back to again and again. Every time there is a scandal of certain politicians of the Indian origins and people linked with India, there is always this idea that this is all part of a single network, single pattern, and it's all part of a single organized structure of the and it comes back to the same old idea of the Indian pedophile ring operating within Western hemisphere and Western countries in general, and having its impact on all of the major politics regarding all the diaspora of Indians and people related to India in the West. So this idea of the Indian pedophile ring, what exactly is it? What its fundamental purpose? What its, in a sense, what's its prime objective? And what is core idea behind the Indian pedophile ring? Now, before we get into individuals involved in the pedophile ring, because what we have to understand, individuals, yes, they have a functionality X, Y, and Z, but it's more important to understand the idea of the Indian pedophile ring, what it stands for, what its purpose and its values are, instead of individuals, because the individuals can be changed because one politician gets caught in a sex scandal, raping kids, pedophilia, having sex with European boys in Heathrow hotels with his friends from all different political parties and all different Hindu swamis and every single Indian organization, Indian political party being involved. They are all having sex with kids and raping them left, right, and center in Heathrow hotels and all the hotels around Heathrow, and the hotel owners are involved. And we see this entire ring, and the Indian schools, they are involved in this pedophile ring, supplying kids, and school teachers are being involved, cult leaders are being involved. So we see this whole pattern, and the questions keep on reoccurring and the question coming back to again and again of this Indian pedophile ring. So what is the prime objective of Indian pedophile ring? I think what we have to understand, this pedophile ring, or the Westminster pedophile ring, this is not a separate entity. This is merely a subset, a subgroup within that structure, which serves and works, concentrates only to the people of Indian origin, and the politics and institutions and finance and everything regards to India. Now, the fundamental function of this ring is to control politics, control finance, control media, and control every single influential element within their sphere which can influence India. And the main function, because for them to, this is merely an extension of of a structure of Indian pedophile ring operating in India, and it's merely an extension to that which has expanded into West to keep the diaspora in control. So there's no kind of revolution being built up in the Western Hemisphere which can have a great impact on the corruption within India and all the events and the suffering and ongoing genocide of people of India at the hands of the elite in India. Now, what exactly? Now, this is the function is straight up about control of every single political element which could influence the politics of India. And as far as control and the people at the top are concerned, people, in other words, are more or less irrelevant. But in this sense, you must understand the major industries in India, either via military industrial complex, pharmaceutical companies, farming industry, food industry, all the major industry in India is controlled by a very, very, very small group, namely 3 to 4 people. Tata, Mithil, Ambani. These 3 people control over 90% of India's wealth. And if they control 90% of India's wealth, now, when we are saying 90% of India's wealth, there are over 1 billion people living in India. So these people control 90+% of that country, its structure, and extension to that, the lives of those people living in that country. This is something must be understood. That's why we will realize how vicious this structure is, and the level of brutality and absolutely, I think, demonic activities which these people take. Now, to keep their control, to keep a cover on these major goons, these hounds of hell are right at the top. So nobody ever, because these are the descendants of the Aryan kings who have plagued that region for centuries. These are the Pahari Raja or the hill kings and their children who are in control of every single industry in that region. Now, to keep their control on politics, on media, finance, every single element to politics, they have created a structure through which you have to go through to become influential within that country. An extension to that, anything to do with that country in the Western Hemisphere. That's what the main core function of the Indian paedophile ring is. Here comes a first example. A small example of a politician being propped. A politician in Britain, for an Indian origin politician in Britain to go to the parliament. Firstly, there's the whole parliament and the Westminster paedophile ring. But then there's something much more sinister as that, which operates within the Indian circles. And that is the Indian paedophile ring. Because Indian paedophile ring, its history is very old. If you want to go right into the history of pedophilia being used as a political tool, you can go thousands of years back to mythology, even in Hinduism, where they have used child sacrifice to various nefarious deities. Child sacrifice is being used as a political tool of control of society. And you have to understand, it has never been about, this pedophile ring is all about control. It is all about controlling what people, it's a circle of blackmail. At every single layer is based on the concept of blackmailing one person to the other, to the other, to the other. And person at the bottom has less information, the guy on the top has more, the other guy on the top has more. So everybody within the entire structure is only promoted on basis of what kind of activities he has taken part of. So higher they are, yeah, more corrupt, more filthy, more subhuman, more demonic, more they can go, look, when we are talking about the concepts of child sacrifice, this is something which was openly practiced. Well, if you think about it, the cults now in India openly practice child sacrifice. There are always, you look into these swamis which come from India to preach yoga, to preach all this new age nonsense to the West, pretending to be all passive, preaching peace, preaching X, Y, and Z, and everybody, and they claim peace, but their reality. Look at their ashrams. Ashram is like the organization, any cult and its organization's head office. So within the ashrams, every ashram you have seen child dead bodies being found. You have always seen body parts of children being found. You have always seen again and again the stories of child sacrifice within these ashrams, and then these leaders of these ashrams, these yogis, these swamis from India come down here and pretend, and they preach to preach peace to the world, but their reality is anything but peace. They are merely mechanisms of control which preach the Indian elite and the Indian system to the world. This is something which we must understand, because the core principle behind all of these structures is control. So if an Indian politician or somebody related to Indian origin wants to become a politician in the West, they have to go through with these structures. And we have seen it again and again. Every time an Indian origin individual is caught in one scam or another, we have seen again all the links being led to India, these swamis, we have seen the child sacrifice, raping of kids. We have seen the whole shebang which we find in India, because in India they can cover up openly, because nobody questions them. Nobody dares to question the ancient swamis and their rule. But in the West, it's become a bit more. People have become to question how peaceful these people who claim peace really are and what they really stand for. So this idea of this ring, it's all about covering up the elite. And covering up the elite, so every time there is a political struggle of any kind, you will have these people through their setup, through their system coming through and only propping people who are part of their circle, who have gone through with these circles of pedophilia, swamis, raping kids and child sacrifice, the whole shebang. And the system only uses these principles so you could always be controlled. You will, first thing they make sure, this system, is that you have no free will. The only way you are ever promoted in these structures is to make sure that the concept of free will that you have is finished before you are promoted. This is the first step. Once your free will is gone, you are merely a tool for these people to manipulate how they please. Then you are promoted. Then you are brought into either the mainstream of politics or X, Y, and Z, and you're promoted as the face of India, the symbol of India, peace-loving, and promotion of everything. And we see this pattern throughout. Either we talk about Europe, America, Canada, all the Western countries. We see them promoting these kind of people who have this kind of history. And whoever questions the concept of India, questions these people, the nature of these people, and this circle, they can forget about politics. Because this circle will, to their last breath, fight against those people. That's why we see only certain characters, certain individuals with a certain characteristics are promoted through these circles. And the Indian pedophile ring always makes sure they pick up the right person. Because in reality, you see these Indian origin politicians in the West, say for example in UK, they represent nothing. They stand for nothing. They are merely representations of the Indian regime. They are nothing. They are nothing else. They have no political views. They have no political ideology. They stand for nothing. They are nothing. The only thing they stand for is to promote India. Even the ones who are born outside India, they still promote this concept of India because they have gone through with this circle of the Indian pedophile ring. And this is not only remote to politics. All the religious institutions as well. Just before we spoke about Swamis and the cults, all the cults, every single cult related to India is merely a group of pedophiles. All the Swamis, every single Swami leader, these cultists from India, they're all a bunch of pedophiles who have been promoted by the Indian state to dumb down the Indian public so they will not rebel against the Indian elite and the Indian system. And they are only sent to the West by the Indian regime to promote the idea that everything in India is all cozy. And there is no need. Everything is peaceful. And only these kind of cultists and the preachers who preach against it, they can forget about preaching. And they are opposed by the Indian regime by the max. An extension to that is being extended to the West. So the only way you are promoted throughout the system, either be in religious context, these religious cultist structures, only the pedophiles, pedophiles who have been through the system can be promoted. Either be a political structure, only the pedophiles and people related to these circles and their political groups are promoted. And then we get into the financial structures, either be a banking or the finance. Now, there's another circle of control. We hear about this concept of these ideas and then these groupings of we represent, or they will say they represent, a group of Indian businessmen. In other words, what they are talking about, these are a group of people who are controlled through their businesses by the Indian elites because their entire financial structure is run by them. They are merely props which are promoted. Again, their finance, their businesses are empty. Because in reality, if, for example, majority of Indian businessmen will use a certain type of financial services, i.e. Indian financial services related to their own groups, and they are in turn related to India and their political structure and the religious structures. So it's all part of that one circle. So the entire thing is controlled. So the control goes right to the top. So the entire, either you go into the political structure, all the political parties, you see every single politician related to India being just a dead vegetable, merely barking orders from India. They represent nothing, they stand for nothing, they are nothing. Merely a tool for the Indian regime to say what the Indian regime wants them to say, have no viewpoint of their own. And this pedophile ring continues to control the entire community throughout every single structure in their life, either be it their religious structures, either be it their financial structure, all the accountants, all the chartered accountants, all the financiers and banking system which they have created, it all goes out to part of the circle which would control. Ultimately, they will choose who to promote, which business to promote, which business to make success, which business to fail, which business stays, which business goes. Every single aspect is controlled. The structure is based in such a manner. And the ones who oppose this system, they will be opposed throughout the system. Either be it any aspect, from the community structures, the religious structures, the political structure. And the pedophile ring will work, Indian pedophile ring will work at its most to stop rebellion from within, because that worries them the most. So they keep in control of these people who speak up against what's really happening in India. And what the Indian elite and the fascists in India are doing their day in and a day out. And their minions everywhere in the media, in the finance, will do their utmost to stop any sense of rebellion, any sense of voice against the system. And it carries on and on and on. And the system will only promote the most corrupt, the most dirty, the most vicious, the most filth out of the entire community. And this is a system which we carry on seeing. Just for example, now we saw an Indian politician in UK getting caught. He is a pedophile. He's been a pedophile for a very, very long time. He's been covering up for pedophiles. He's part of the Indian pedophile ring. He goes to all these Indian-controlled hotels, and they have these orgies with kids from various Indian schools, which they bring in and rape them, kill them, and make their dead bodies are disappeared. And then the media claims, oh, these are successful Indian businessmen working in Britain for the greater purpose of Britain. But then nobody dares to question any of the activities. This is the reality of these people and what these people are up to. Now, as far as the ring itself and the history related to it, history is very, very, very old. It comes from, well, if the oldest part of pedophilia and child sacrifice being used as a political tool to manipulate politics is not new in India. It comes from the Vedas and the Aryans. The Aryans used child sacrifice as openly as a political tool of controlling people. It's not hidden. In their mythology, in their philosophy, it's an open practice which they practice throughout their history. The Aryan kings, which are these main top Indian finance families, they are all descendants of inbred, incest-ridden families which are in control of the Indian finance system. And they are in control throughout that time. And these people and their ancestors openly practiced child rape, child sacrifice, human sacrifice as a tool to have political control over people. And the proof of that could be found throughout their history. The oldest one in the Vedas, where the Aryans did this, Aryans committed pedophilia, the Aryans came on a horse, they raped this, they committed this, they killed so many kids, 6 girls were executed, the 7th Aryan son was born. The whole mythology is full of child sacrifice. They use mythology to prove their political point. And to implement that political ideology onto a society, they created mythology. Because you have to remember, Aryan, they consider themselves to be God. They don't consider the concept of, if you can call it God, to be outside, but they consider themselves to be gods themselves, because they are descendant of, well, they are gods at the end of the day. This is the ideology. The oldest examples, there are so many. One of the most oldest examples of where this ideology of their blood supremacy or supremacy of their bloodline comes from is the core idea of the Vedas and the guy who wrote the Vedas, that be Brahma. Now, the fact is, to justify Brahma and his purity of his bloodline and the purity of the Aryan bloodline. We hear this nonsense again and again, the Aryan bloodline and the purity of the Aryan bloodline. Now Brahma, this is the guy who wrote the Aryan manifesto and the Aryan, you could call it the Aryan constitution, the so-called Vedas, which Hitler followed and so forth and so on. And Brahma set a principle in stone when he raped his own daughter, and the entire Aryan clan was born through that ancestral relationship. So their blood purity is so pure, and to keep their purity of their bloodline, they are allowed incest written throughout and practiced throughout Aryan history and Aryan philosophy, wherever you see it, either be in the West, the East, anywhere else. Philosophy, the idea of the purity of the bloodline and the Aryan through incest says the same regardless of where you go. So this idea, now Brahma set in principle through raping his own daughter and creating the Aryan clan. And a fundamental fact that the purity of the Aryan bloodline must be preserved regardless of what you have to do. This idea that incest isn't the worst part of Brahma raping his own daughter. It's the idea which is even worse, of preserving the purity of the Aryan bloodline regardless of what you have to do. Now, throughout history, what we have seen, they do make exceptions. They do make exceptions. When they face a revolution or some sort of a opposition, they create figureheads. There are many figureheads I could name. For example, I'll use a very small Indian politician, a meaningless politician who has no meaning. She stands for nothing. She is nothing. Mayawati. She is so-called the leader of Dalits in India. But she is a physical representation of oppression of Dalits within India and within that regime through caste system. And she's a Dalit herself. She's been promoted merely by the system, by the regime, to keep a lid on the revolution. So revolution can always be controlled. Caste system is a worse kind of oppression. It is slavery. But it is a slavery which has carried on from thousands of years. But the problem is, because they make exceptions and give them these false leaders, false prompted leaders, the entire revolution gets controlled. Because she will never speak against India and the Indian regime. By doing that, she is not only lying, betraying against her own people, but she's also keeping the system intact. She should challenge the system, call it for what it is. This is a fascist system. It is based on Aryan philosophy. Well, you'll never hear that from her. Because her own ideology, because she is promoted by the people who have made an exception in her case to prompt her to a certain political level. That something must be understood. She is only promoted to a degree. So she could be merely seen as a figurehead and the revolution is controlled to a degree. But in the rest, she doesn't have no control. She is merely a house Negro which keeps the Negroes within the house check. Nothing more. Just a control mechanism. So her exception with the system is even limited. And this is the idea of this whole Indian pedophile ring and how it continues. We will continue this discussion further in our coming videos, and we will give more examples. And for now, I would like to conclude. The fundamental factor behind the ring is about political, financial, and absolute control of the politics surrounding India, finance, and any sense of possibility or rebellion against the system. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Te Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.